Okay, got it. So I have been involved for the last 27 years with a relational model called nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg developed it. Um, how many people on the call have had some experience with nonviolent communication? Okay, great. Um, I have been sharing this for all this time because I have found it to be incredibly effective, just profoundly effective in terms of connecting people, helping people be connected, and helping us see our common humanity, which is very connecting when we can see that. And it's based basically, and I'll just, for those of you who haven't had any experience with it, it's based on the idea of sharing our feelings and needs rather than our thoughts and our opinions. And when we share our feelings and needs, that is also a very connecting way to communicate because they come from our heart rather than from our head. I got my definition, this is called empathy usually. And empathy can be very vague, the concept of it, you know, walking in another person's shoes and things like that. But I get my definition from Carl Rogers, who started or the co-founder of the humanistic psychology field back in the 1950s. And Marshall Rosenberg, who started nonviolent communication, was a student of Carl Rogers when he was in graduate school. And then he took it out to the community. So Carl Rogers defined empathy as listening very carefully to what the other person is hearing you, what you're hearing the other person say, and then feeding back to them what you're hearing them say. And it's not about just parroting back to them, parroting their words back to them, but it's about, you know, feeding back to them what you're hearing them say without adding your perspective, your opinions, without reassuring them, without trying to help them. You know, in other words, just listening very carefully. I'm reading my notes here a little bit because there's so much to say about this. It's a big topic and it's easy to get distracted. So I'm trying to stay fairly focused here. So this idea of listening, it sounds simple, but it's not that easy because we've been taught usually from very early on that it's very important to make judgments. It's important to evaluate people's behavior. It's good to help people, you know, fix their problems. And this is a completely different paradigm. This is a very non-hierarchical, very egalitarian paradigm where you're just listening to the other person and not trying to fix them or help them, just hearing them. And there, again, that is just one of the most connecting things that we can do for people. But it takes practice because we are, you know, very much trained to do it the other way. And even though I've been doing this for years, I hate to admit how often I just slip up, you know, and offer someone advice rather than just feed back to them what I'm hearing them say. So today, what I'm hoping we can do is just really hear one another and feedback to one another. I want to try to keep us all in the big room, even though there's over 20 of us, because I think it'd be really beneficial and be a really connecting experience. If we absolutely need to, we can maybe go to breakout rooms later, but for now, I think I'd really like to keep us here in the room. So Montgomery is going to be leading us in a centering exercise. But before he does that, I just want to check, are there any questions so far? Okay, so I'm not seeing any. Can you speak them if you have them? I've got two screens going.
Jonathan just raised his hand.
Hi, Suzanne. In my NVC training, we were actually taught a list of vocabulary words that might be helpful. I hope you're going to have something like that for us.
Yeah. Well, yesterday I did send everybody a message with the list of feelings words and list of needs words. And I didn't have exact email, so I sent them to everybody through the summit system. Also, Scott has got the links to those lists. He can put them in the chat. And if you want to open them, take a few minutes to open them, that would probably be very helpful. What I find most amazing about these lists of feelings and lists of needs is how many feelings and needs are on these lists. Because we do not usually think in terms of feelings and needs. Marshall Rosenberg said we're kind of feelings and needs illiterate. We just have not been taught, even though as you read down the list of feelings, you will recognize every one of them. We've all had every one of them. But in terms of identifying them and speaking them, we don't have that much practice. So we forget about a lot of them, like exuberance, exasperated, these are things that we all know how they feel. So anyway, that's a really fun thing about the lists. And I always suggest people carry those lists around with them. I go back to my lists quite often, even though I've been doing this for quite a while, if I just can't find the feeling that I've got going on. Any other questions before we get started about what I said so far? Okay. There's a lot of explanation that I could do, but I'm going instead to just really have us do this and not talk too much more about it. So, if you do have questions coming up, if you can raise your hand with the, when you go down to reactions on the bottom of your screen and where it says raise hand, then, but in the meantime, we'll just sort of plug along and see what happens. So, Montgomery, do you want to center us, help us get centered?
Feel free to just raise your physical hand too. I can see everybody. So yeah, it's always helpful to take a few breaths and feel our feet on the floor. Relax our hands on our knees or our lap, or we can all feel a sense of grounding, whether that's in your feet or your seat. You can even just feel your back against a chair if that's where you're sitting. And this opportunity to come into yourself. We always have so many layers, right? Our physical experience, our mental experience, emotional. Maybe you operate in the psychological too. So just take a few breaths and drop in, feel, notice what you are experiencing. And this is an opportunity to see what arises, what floats to the top of your attention. Maybe with your mind, think about your experience with this summit so far and see what arises, see what comes up to the forefront. Maybe take 2 more deep breaths. And when you feel ready and complete, you can come back into the room. Acknowledge all the little faces and squares. have our Brady Bunch moment. If you're from Western culture. Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
Now we get to listen.
Yeah. So before we get started, I want to offer a couple of tips. What they are is if you try to start your sentences with I feel or right now I'm feeling, this is a really good way to keep us out of our thoughts. So I feel, and if the third word is the feeling, then it will keep us out of our thoughts and out of the story. You know, we can also tell some of the story, but the idea here is to try staying with the feelings as much as possible. And then another tip is if you say just a couple of sentences, 2 or 3, 4 sentences at a time, and then leave space for people to respond to you, that's easier. Marshall Rosenberg said we can't really take in more than 40 words at once, which is an amazingly small amount of words. And I usually say, maybe 100 words at once, but it is really helpful for the other person who is trying to listen to have it in smaller pieces than a whole story. So what I'm going to have us try to do here is whoever wants to say what's coming up for them, if you just want to raise your hand, and then whoever wants to respond, go ahead and do that. If we talk over one another a little bit, it doesn't matter. We'll work it out. And if more than one person wants to respond, that's great as well. And we'll just, so from here on, we're going with the flow.
And Suzanne, I think this might be a good time to pause the recording. Does
Yes.
that work for you? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And can you put the link to this survey in the chat, Scott, now, so everybody can give their feedback to the summit through that link? Yeah. So in the next couple of minutes, how about if we just go around and speak, say a word or two about what our takeaway is from this, and then we can continue to go on if everybody wants to, anybody who wants to. You can just jump in. I'm going to say gratitude and a little bit of discomfort because, my vision was for everybody to just be so happy, which of course doesn't usually happen in life, but but mostly gratitude for all of you showing up and being here, being willing to be here.
I feel gratitude too for it deepened my appreciation for holding in the spirit the feeling and allowing the spirit to do it. I noticed that I get impatient. And that was interesting to see that and realize well, anyway, it was good. Thank you. It was great.
Feeling open-hearted. I'm still feeling a little agitated from the morning prior to the meeting, but both of those things. Thanks for all of you, and for Suzanne for hosting this.
Feel appreciative.
I'm feeling compassionate towards everyone who's feeling a little uncomfortable. I'm also feeling very hopeful though, because I think during all the busyness, we actually need to have moments like this where we can reflect on our feelings and our needs. So thank you to everyone.
I'll say I'm feeling reminded. These are good, important reminders, and that the collective nature of needs and our deep interconnectedness is really alive for me right now. Thank you for showing up, everybody.
I'm also feeling more open-hearted, somehow made possible by the diversity of feelings and needs openly shared here. So feeling gratitude for that as well.
And Andrew said gratitude. Jen said revived. Mary Sage said sensitive. And appreciation for everyone showing up fully once again. That was Andrew as well. Connected, yes.
Mhm.
And Anne said, I like Scott's word, reminded.
Yeah.
I'm feeling facilitated.
And what need of that did that meet, Montgomery? What need of yours? Teasing.
Connection.
Connection.
Yeah, feel connected to you all. Thank you. I wish we could all just do a big hug.
Well, we can, sort of. I have this song, I lead songs sometimes. They have this song that says, the greatest illusion in this world is the illusion of separation. Well, let's officially end the call.